it's more than 20 years. An overview of 20 years of EU research on the relationship between social innovation on the one hand and local development on the other hand. There is quite good time access, which I will explain in this table. Is there a pointer to move that from channel to
I think that's what probably is the
non-chat?
non-chat.
If there is not this one, I will just
Ci abbiamo una bacchetta magari, nessuno ha nel proprio studio una bacchetta con tanti occhiati. Non hai una bacchetta.
non ricordo. In my career, I started as a student in Antwerp in business school. I abandoned business school. It was incompatible, but I learned a lot of chemistry and physics at business school, so it was an advantage to be there. Commercial engineering also chemistry. Chemistry or brain chemistry, for example. So after that, I went to study in Leuven, as I said, mathematical economics and so on. And then in the US, and bit by bit I understood that there was much more than neoclassical economics, that there was institutional economics, that there was political economy. I also learned a lot about development, regional development, and so on. All these lessons, say an academic is an internal student, and that's right. If you're not an internal student as an academic, you should change professions. That's for sure. So all these lessons and these readings in these different situations and circumstances, they really help me to understand that you have to look at local development in a very interdisciplinary way, but also in a multi-thematic way. And most of it, discussed before the break, you have to keep talking to practitioners, and you have to be a practitioner yourself if you want that your scientific work plays a significant role in local development. So in fact, we developed the term social innovation in interaction with practitioners working for neighborhoods in crisis, and a few other more grassroots-based European projects back in the 80s, early 90s. So that's a bit of background. All right. So this paper, I will read the abstract just to structure my talks, and then I will do in my own way take a bit of distance from the presentation and point out to you what is most interesting. I mean, the literature behind this is enormous. For each of the projects, there is at least one book, there are translations, there are journal articles by different partners, participants in the paper is an overview of 2 decades of research projects on the study of the relationship between local development and social innovation by the International Action Research Network, coordinated by the first author, that's Nina in this case. The other author is Abid Mahmoud, who is one of my PhD students who came from Pakistan to work with me in Lille and then moved with me to Newcastle, and now is a senior researcher in Cardiff. It explains the need to study the relationships between local development and opportunities for human development, and the aspirations for an epistemological term away from local growth to local development. For an economist, of course, this distinction is extremely important. And for a converted economist, growth to development this is a debate that has been going on in economic literature, in the large sense of the term, for 200 years now. Go back to German historical school, they're talking 150 years ago, but before that there were contributions that are quite relevant on the relationships between policy making and local development, the relationship between capitalism and local development, or readings we assign to Trump, for example. I don't think we could convince him to do that. So there is a very long history of reflections on the relationship between economic growth, local development, and the role of public policy. Now, using the chronological overview, the paper concentrates on questions related to the specific objectives of the projects, different projects in this trajectory, and the theoretical and methodological challenges. It explains how, by finding solutions to these questions, over the years, the network built a social innovation action research framework that can now be used as a reference for mutual enrichments between different approaches in social innovation research. Wow.
It's a virus. It's only a virus.
So, so no, I think it's just completely new. At least that's my experience.
This job
Okay. Did you already know the first point I stressed? I will explain a little bit what the institutional context was of this research when I get there. But for me, most important is to reconstruct the epistemological movement embodied in 20 years of research trajectory. I used the term network. I'm not going to name all the people who were involved in this, but it's a Europe-broad network. First initiative I took was basically my own thing. I was still part of the coordination team of the Poverty 3 program of the European Commission, but the head of the unit didn't like what I was doing because it was too social and not sufficiently in line with what the DG competition wanted and so on. So what's new in the world? Today it's much worse, of course. But today, social policy is completely harassed by the economic logic. At that time, there was still some struggle, it's still unbalanced. Artists, yeah, okay, you understand the word? Yeah. So, yeah. Epistemology, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a philosopher of science. Epistemology is basically addressing three questions in connection with each other. What do we research? How do we decide on what we research? There, of course, plays a role on how we view the world, how we interact with the world. It's already an ontological dimension there. How do we research? Methodology in the large sense of the term, which theories do we bring on board, which methods of searching verity, searching answers do we bring on board? And then the third question, what do we accept as being truthful? What do we consider as belonging to the verity according to the epistemological stance? This is a very important question, this last one. When I go and talk for non-believers about social innovation, they always ask me, how do you measure social innovation? Now I've become so arrogant as to say, I beg your pardon? And then, this is my lecture for this afternoon, I go back to the community. If the community, in its participatory and co-constructive constellation decides that what was decided to do, to undertake as social innovation, and looks at its outcomes and what the impact is on the cohesion of the community, that's what we call measurement in social innovation terms. In other words, we go back to the social relations, to the social bonds. We can measure a few things about connection between people, but measuring these connections is not enough to understand the social dynamics that come out, that emerge from socially innovative initiatives. So we have to go back to qualitative appraisal, and we have to go back to join that to collective, community-based collective appraisal of what's going on in this process. It could even be in this logic that the community understands that particular community initiatives failed because the state in its expected role failed. And so it would judge the state policy and point at the state policy as failing, while keeping the initiative itself at a very high score, giving it a very high appraisal as having a high potential for success, if the state had done differently, if the state had done what was expected from it, provide funding, provide some expertise, provide land. Land is very often a critical issue for housing, for agriculture, and so on. Anyway, since I'm getting hungry, I should move on. All right, 7 international projects which are coordinated by myself, and sometimes with Eric Swinglido, sometimes with Team Hilliard, and as research assistants in part, we were very strongly present Avi Mahmoud, I already mentioned, who is the co-author of the article that we published in European Planning Studies, and Diana Kahn, with whom I co-edited, as well, co-edited the International Handbook on Social Innovation, and with whom I am preparing a new book which will very strongly address these challenges I have pointed out in my first presentation. So the Integrated Area Development Project was the one which I called the Golden Handshake from the European Commission. So we want you out of the team, but we give you, at that time, €150,000 to do research on the relationship between global development and social innovation. They didn't call it social innovation at that time. We called it social innovation after 1 year of doing the research. The network then was Athens, Pablo Decima, Germany, Arturo de los Apires in Aveiro, later became Secretary of Spatial Planning of the government. Phil Cook at the time, he was still a socialist, and a few others. The second one is they were not in the right order, and the corresponds somewhere between fantastic and social policy, so this is more an illustration. The second one was Sputnik. Maybe it's better to use, this slide, so this gives the right visualization. So I was saying integrated area development, which is the one funded by Poverty 3, started at the end of the 80s. Intellectually it did. Officially it was only funded as of 91, as you can say. Urban restructuring and social polarization in the city, coordinated, submitted and coordinated together with my good friend Eric Swinglido. The reason why we submitted this was that in integrated area development, there was a certain naivete based on hope and opportunities as discovered by communities to do things better, to deal with housing problems, to have better communication, and so on. I will explain that. There was a bit of naivete about the structural constraints. And this naivete about structural constraints we wanted to overrule by looking much better at socio-economic dynamics, especially real estate dynamics within cities, which could, first of all, cause worse conditions of social inclusion, more social exclusion, and less opportunities to set up alternatives. I was referring to land policy, for example, and certainly today local authorities have a very strong tendency to put their land in the market or on the market instead of keeping it as assets for doing their own thing. So there is a kind of a pendulum movement going on between these projects, from one project to the other. Let's leave Vallecas out for a moment. Let's move from Ursvik to single column. Single column goes back to the logic of integrated area development. It looks at initiatives of local development. It theorizes them using social innovation. I will explain in a minute how we got to the concept as a matter of fact. But takes much better into account the structural dynamics of real estate markets, political system, and so on in the city. So it has learned from Ursvik. It's more realistic in dealing with local authorities. It's more realistic in dealing with the real estate sector, in dealing with market dynamics, and so on. Does that mean that it becomes much more reformist? No. It means that there is a much clearer awareness about what opportunities are, what social political conditions should be guaranteed in order to make sure that particular initiatives could work. And then the pendulum goes back. It goes back to structural analysis. The Molokos is about development models and logic of social organization in space. Multiscalarity comes in, lessons learned from theoretical developments, for example, the new institutionalism debate. Should new institutionalism be about transactions? Yes, we understand transactions in the meaning of the old historical schools. No, if you understand transactions in the sense of Williamson, for example. So it's always the same debate. Taking into account also the cultural turn in institutional and structural analysis, which already makes the bridge to what Jessup and I call later on neo-structuralism. Structuralism is taking into account that transformation of structures is analyzed through strategic agency, is analyzed through different triggers of institutionalization processes, and so on. Catharsis and social cause then are fully in the field of transdisciplinarity, working with actors, developing methods of participation, of co-construction, developing research agendas with direct inputs from actors from all over the place. I have no time to really go into this, but if you have read the Social Innovation Handbook, and I really recommend you to do that, basically that handbook is based on lessons learned from Catharsis and social cause. So, can you read this in the back? Because the lights are off. Yeah. Maybe you should switch over the lights. No. But this was so in building utopia, if you like, social innovation as a utopia, and social innovation as a practice, as a process dynamics rooted in reality. So the study of reality, the definition, together with the diversity of agents of social innovation strategies, were always in dialogue with each other. Valikoris sticks out because it makes really the comparison with what we called later the TIMS, territorial innovation models, and TIMS, and my most cited article, Google Scholar, close to 1,300 citations now, and it's very visible because it makes this comparison between regional innovation systems, orthodox way, and territorial innovation models, which adopt a completely different ontology. I'm exaggerating now. Adopt a completely different ontology than the regional innovation systems. I already said quite a bit about this earlier this morning. The rational approach to innovation systems, the reduction of the meaning of society and community life to an agency system where resources and objectives are connected to each other in a very rationalist way. No attention for social political dynamics, no attention for social political struggle, which in real life innovation systems is present all the time. I don't think that these innovators are sitting there as angels around the table and dividing the work. Come on. It's a struggle for life. Struggle for life. Okay, so let's stress a bit on the methodological challenges, because that's what I think is most important for you people, the stage of your PhD you are. You want to decide on what methodology. In this research, we have developed bit by bit a trajectory of what we believed is decent action research. A place for theory, a place for empirical analysis, a place for the roles of different actors, methods, and so on. So it's very important that we manage to each time identify the methodological challenges for the project. And I don't want to present myself as an angel now, saying that we do all this at the moment when we were doing the project. Some of this was written down retrospectively. So this is what we did. In fact, this is what we... But for integrated area development, IAD, we certainly had this in mind from the very beginning. Understanding the processes of social exclusion at the local level, how to turn them into integrated area development. Saying that processes of social exclusion were very much rooted in the territorial dynamics. This refers to quite a bit of the work I did with my French PhD students at the time. Those of you who read French could also go and read there. For acoustic, understanding partially articulated processes of social exclusion inclusion. This refers to real estate dynamics, interaction between economy and society, and the lens through which we tried to develop this understanding was large-scale development projects, temples of culture, big public places like the Guggenheim Museum, for example, was one of our cases. Moulaert was one of our cases. We tried to understand what the impact was on the real estate market of these projects, on the housing conditions of people who had to be, didn't have to be, but were expelled, were dislocated. Differences in policies between the French and the Spanish authorities, clearly. Moulaert meant displacement of people, but also meant, in the French logic, building of new social housing. the south of Moulaert. Valipores, I jumped, it's standing apart, but it's important in understanding the difference between the innovation systems and the mainstream understanding of the mainstream meaning of the term and territorial innovation models on which I will hopefully be glad for. Single the methodological challenge here was to develop a more realistic model of the interaction between socially innovative practices and processes on the one hand, and structural and institutional dynamics going on in the city on the other hand. So we had a whole series of case studies which were all analyzed according to this, what we call the Almarin model, alternative models for local innovation. The models I will explain a bit. Each of these books has published with each of these projects is documented in books published with Routledge or Edward Routledge of Oxford University Press and Edward Talbert. Again, transdisciplinarity pops up as one of the main concerns in catharsis and social policy. Okay. Here you will discover our earlier definitions of social innovation, satisfaction of basic needs achieved through the combination of several processes, the revealing of needs by grassroots movements and through institutional dynamics. This is still, I would say, a very careful, prudent definition. I was paid by the European Commission under the supervision of DG Social Policy at the time. Very soon we would change this formulation, institutional dynamics, into empowerment towards social political transformation. Also because we discovered that in the smallest initiatives there was already a political challenge. Talk to the mayor, make sure that you have a with deputy mayor responsible for urban development and so on. Okay, so the integrated area model is based on satisfaction of basic needs, integration of private groups into the local production systems, institutional dynamics, the existent institutional dynamics, how do you deal with them as social innovators, but also how do you try to stir new institutionalizations, new institutions that make it possible, for example, to have a more direct link with City Hall, with decision-making centers, or to build connections with other social innovative organizations and initiatives. Build a network, build an association that would lobby to defend the interests of these different institutions. All right. Very important is the theoretical dimension of this trajectory is evolution from the concept of integrated area development to local involvement. After the first 2 years, we started using the term social innovation as the big connector between satisfaction of basic needs, innovation in social relations, and social political empowerment. We thought that this was really a term that covered these 3 dimensions. Social innovation covers these 3 dimensions. These 3 dimensions are features of social innovation in the way we witnessed it. We witnessed it in the different projects we were looking at. While also seeing at the same time when projects did not work that one of the 3 was missing, or that conditions to make one of the 3 happen were missing. And these conditions then could make could be due to social-political tensions, to institutional lacunae, to cultural differences between the different actor groups, and things like that. So it was important that we also had theories who could help us to understand the relationship between institutions, agencies meaning types of typical behavior, and also be connected to the discussions of social practices. Well, my tendency is more to understand social practice in the way, for example, a Saturday will do it, saying that by doing it, people will do it regularly, will start imitating, so it becomes an evolutionary concept, and not a very innovative, with a not very innovative concept. So I'm much more interested in strategic agency as part of socially innovative initiative. This is you will have to read the article, of course. I can make it available even if it's not published yet. Again, each of the projects, this time theoretical foci and social-political frustrations. You say, well, why did you choose these two colors? Why these two types, rather? Theoretical foci would be the general logic or the natural logic of a researcher who tries to understand what is going on. The social-political frustrations we mainly learn from talking to the other actors, the non-scientists, that, well, okay, well, what are you doing there? You're building an agenda, you're seeing, for example, how you try to create employment at a very local level, but these communities, which are linked to neighborhoods, their labor market is not limited to the neighborhood. It's the city as a whole, or even the hinterland. So we understand that there is a local labor market to be created, because there is a lack of social services, there's a lack of maintenance of public space, and so on. So there is a need for local jobs. But you cannot just analyze your labor market dynamics or your socially innovative initiatives to create jobs for the well-being of everybody by looking at the very local dimensions of the labor market. You have to make your analysis of your neighborhood labor market within the context of the overall urban labor market. So, another criticism we received is that we kept thinking too much in socio-economic terms, social economics terms, and not enough in political terms and so on. I myself was still making my conversion. I didn't have a horse, so I could not be thrown off by the lightning. I was falling bit by bit and standing up bit by bit also. So there was this evolution in our thought from social economy to critical sociology to also taking into account theories addressing the need for social political transformation. And so on. So we could do this exercise for each of the projects, and we did this. And this all had an impact on the way this action research model was built. Basic lesson being, it's important to have theories in a project. It's important to select them in an appropriate way. Are the theories relevant to understand what particular social innovation initiatives are or not? How they link to the local reality, and so on. But you have to be willing to correct your theory if it turns out that it doesn't work well. There is an echo of pragmatism there. You're familiar with pragmatic research approaches. And you have to make sure that your theories are built in such a way that they talk to reality. Again, pragmatism. They talk to reality but through the eyes of the other actors, policymakers, activists, people in the housing associations, and so on and so on. This is what brought us later on, classes and social policy, in some projects which I do not cover here, to the concept of joint problematization. You look at the reality with a group of actors, some theoretical, some activists, some people concerned with housing needs, and so on. You'll have to read this if you want to know more about this. Now, the approach has always been about change, obviously. Social innovation is about changing social relations, bringing them closer to installations of solidarity, reciprocity, co-construction, and so on. So it's not, if you look at social innovation in a local context, it's not enough to define the local. Worse even, you have to look at what the meaning of local development is, and what the agencies and institutional changes behind that development are. So, in the IIT project, very strong focus on the role of activists, on the role of volunteers, local leaders, pragmatists, but local, the word escapes me now. Voluntarism at the local level, situated within subsystems of the encompassing local system, multi-level geography. What's dynamic about this? Dynamic about this is that these local leaders had to always talk to other leaders, had to talk to other organizations, had to talk to political instances in order to build coalitions, in order to build networks, to make it possible for the social initiative to happen. And obviously, in the interaction with these actors, the agenda would change. The agenda would change, but still the interests of the people who launched it and who felt the need to make such an initiative was primordial, was always at the first place on the stage. So each time in the right column there is a very important observation on how development should be approached, be it theoretically or methodologically. Let's go through that list because it has a very important impact on how the whole trajectory has developed. Urspeak, I already explained what the dynamics are, interaction with the real estate market, urban development. Single very strong focus on the fact that a neighborhood, a locality, has a history, social, economic, political, and that when new initiatives are rising, very often they emerge from that trajectory, that historical trajectory, or they can go against that historical trajectory. Path breaking versus path dependency. But breaking with the historical trajectory never means forgetting and dropping the past, because that's not possible. I mean, there is always this remainder or this revisitation of social, cultural, economic capital of the past in what you're doing in the contemporary circumstances and in the future. That fact is very much across experiences. Okay, some illustrations here. This is the Alpine model, which really, as I said, builds the relationships between the three dimensions of social innovation, satisfy which needs, transform which and how social relations, and was the role of the organizational dynamics, values, organizational and institutional dynamics of the civil society, from which the agents arise, and so on. This is all in the route city to city. These figures are all there. This is more connected to, these are just illustrations. This is more connected to the Holocaust. It's an example of how regulation theory, network theory, and cultural political economy can be put in connection to each other. I will not develop on this now, we can come back in the discussion. Now, my main message in this presentation is how epistemological challenges drove us to define, not a model, because I don't believe in models too much, but at least a framework for socially innovative action research that seems to work. So the EID project, the scientific and policy-oriented trigger of the research trajectory, DG Social Policy, the European Commission, parallel to 8 days of global development literature and policy approach, which became very scientifically and socio-politically relevant from the late 1970s onwards. This also explains why already in that period we started criticizing regional innovation systems. It's like a parallel track which led to my less well-known work on the social religion. It's not as well written as part of my other work, but at least it was a logical outcome of that. So we saw in, well, I try to make you see, but it's a lot of material in one move, of course. But there was a recurrent change of focus on the analysis of either the socio-political structure and institutions in which the socially innovative development missions were taking place, or the proactive power of the socially innovative agencies and processes. Building initiatives, creation of utopia on the one hand, and then how this utopia, practical utopia, use a contemporary term, how this practical utopia interact with the social structural dynamics in the cities. So there is this growth, this pendulum movement between structural analysis and socially proactive practice shows a correlation with the social political frustrations about the theoretical flow in each project takes place. How does this explain moving towards infinite transdisciplinarity? In general terms, first, interdisciplinarity, well, as I already argued before, it is not possible to talk about social unity in society, which is so complex, in a disciplinary way. You have to work interdisciplinary. Second, it is not possible to talk about in a meaningful way, scientifically meaningful way, about social innovation with scientists only. You have to do it in an action research context. And this action research context has evolved and is still evolving. I've said in anthropology, of course, nobody would be scandalized. You'd say, well, researcher, if he wants to understand what's going on, he has to sit and work and interact for 1 year at a time and then be part of it. For economists and sociologists, in a more traditional sense of the word, it's less evident to do that. Still, action research and social innovation today means participating in different roles as a scientist, as an activist, as a facilitator of debates, as an architect of co-construction processes, and so on. So you can see, if you read the analysis in more detail, that interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity are two sides of the same scientific methodological movement. Let's give this this is an overview. Yes, it's an overview, not exhaustive overview, of the theories that play a very important role in building some of the analytical frameworks and projects. You can see that theoretical foci are very important in the first part of the trajectory. The first part in which the transdisciplinarity was a bit weaker or a bit more traditional. The transdisciplinarity was there in Singapore very strongly, also in IAG, but the scientists were still there much more in what you would have called an expert role, whereas today they are in catharsis. Today, well, that's not today, but in the last projects, catharsis and social policy. They are in these multiple roles, and they are in this movement between roles. They can move from one role to the other, they can combine one role. When they have to accept that an activist becomes the analyst at a certain point. I mean, everything is interactive. I will skip this one. Yeah. Bargaining the future of social innovation and research, keep in mind interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity are two sides of the same movement. They have to work together. For example, you need a theory that allows to place all actors in the social innovation story. The theory, the meta-theory, as we called it at a certain point, because of its interdisciplinary character and because of the diversity of impact, should also be a mirror. The meta-theory should be a mirror in which agents can recognize their role, so that they can use that mirror, that meta-theory, to reflect on their own role and use that theory as an instrument for self-criticism and working towards socially innovative research practice. It doesn't make sense to stay in your ivory tower and a hierarchical research team constellation to tell people on the ground that they should work in a social, democratic or participatory way. This contradiction is unbearable and will lead to disaster in a way, in terms of so this meta-theory is about a shared view or viewing of the world. It's an analytical structure capable of hosting key elements from existing approaches and theories. We saw these evolutions through these different projects, criticizing the theories that were used from a social political point of view, but also criticizing from other disciplines' point of view or other theories' point of view. Offering epistemological baselines, relevance to research questions. I mean, activists involved in the grassroots social movements, are they interested in research questions, or is that just scientist bullshit? No, usually they are. Their research questions are very practical. How can we build more stable relationships with the local authorities? How can we make sure local authorities develop a real, genuine interest in social housing policy, reinvent social housing policies? These are their practical questions. As researchers, of course, we have to add questions. We have to add questions in the sense of what's the history of social housing in this area, how is social housing funded? And then very soon we end up with questions about redistribution, which is the biggest curse word today. Stability in society towards the future, we discussed informally before. Stability in society will be higher taxes for higher incomes. And they will have a choice, of course. They can go and live in condominiums with bodyguards, or they can call it take responsibility, or be sufficiently socially selfish, and pay for their security by making sure that public finance is working again. There is a rupture, there is an absolute rupture in public funding of social welfare. In Belgium, for example, the shortage on the public budget is exclusively due to fiscal benefits to the higher middle class and the upper middle class. It has been proven. There's no message for politicians. But it's the truth. It's based on facts and analysis. Similarly for France, Jean Baptiste made an analysis of this a few years ago. Okay, so this meta-theoretical framework is a mirror. It's also an arena. It's the conceptual framework of an arena in which all the activists, all the actors participating in a socially innovative initiative together build a view of the city, of the locality, of the place, and the opportunities of the socially innovative initiative within that locality. That's what I just explained. Well, I explained before. So a mirror for the socially innovative transdisciplinarity, shared roles. Then we go back to ethics. I mean, some teams I repeat now, which means that I'm getting to this synthesis. In the paper, there's more explanation on the role of each of the projects in the building of these projects. Bottom-up creativity, for example, in catharsis, governance, and social innovation. Nice in a way. I mean, we launched the concept of bottoming governance in that project, thanks to the work of Marisol Garcia and her team, brought it into the catharsis work. Bottoming governance for local authorities, learning from civil society, from democratic organizations, from grassroots organizations, but also bottoming governance for research teams, challenging the very hierarchical university structures, for example. We want to be creative as teams. We need a certain autonomy. We need a flat hierarchy, whatever the contradiction. Okay, and then now it's time for yoga. No. This is the summary really of everything that is covered in that paper. So now there is a time axis, 1990s, 2001. I don't think you can see it, no? No, so you can hardly see it. But it's a very nice figure. I will read it for you. So in the beginning, so to point I have to put in the chat. So here you have interdisciplinarity, you have transdisciplinarity. No. Keep your hand. And in the gray box it says scientists and actors, theory and practice, meta-theory and framework. So this is like explaining the categories that will follow along the time axis. On top, you have the names of the projects: integrated area development, USPI, urban research in social organization in the city, and social innovation and governance in local communities. Then Valicores and the Mologos are in the second rectangle, and then catharsis and social policy are. So we basically consider three strategic steps in the development of stages better, in the development of this integrated social innovation action. So in the transdisciplinarity axis, for the first three projects, there is the very strong focus on neighborhood development plans. I have no time to explain this. But there you can work with experts, citizens, people in need, and have consultation moments to develop neighborhood development. Also advocacy planning would fit there and has inspired us in the solution. And then you have this movement of the projects where expert networks different types of expertise are recognized. Focus groups, which is a methodology that is known to most of you, I suppose. And then joint action research projects, which meant a lot of different things. I haven't time to explain. And then the last stage, which is the creation of the social platform that Social Polis was, which allowed us to develop this method of joint problematization, the meta theory, and the theoretical framework, co-constructed by different actors, methods of analysis, methods of building socially innovative initiatives, mobilization of research and practice, and science work interactively all the time. In the end, science is practice as much as building a house. We should have a look at most of the details there, and just finish by looking at the last rectangle, the green one. Sorry for standing in front. No. Social innovation action research. What does it include? 3 big categories: interdisciplinarity, meta theory, and research methods. Developed interactively, but also making use of the history of scientific knowledge and the history of scientific methodology, inputs from philosophy of science, as I explained in the chapter with Barbara van Dijk in the International Handbook. Second, transdisciplinarity, meta-framework. The difference between the meta-framework and the meta-theory is that the framework also identifies the methods. So you have different steps in the transdisciplinary research process. Each step requires different methods. We have experiences where step by step, we did that especially in our planning case studies afterwards, step by step new methods are decided in firmly according to their appropriateness for the step that is underway. If it isn't about consultation of particular parcels in a neighborhood, then we will have neighborhood citizens meetings, try to find out what the skills are of the citizens. Can be drawings, can be stories, can be a walk. You go walking with people in their neighborhood, they very easily explain what the problems are, going from the ditches that have to be cleaned, or the public space that is in a vulnerable state, and so on. And then the third element of this action research is the way the researchers work themselves. Social innovation ethics do not only apply to the social innovative initiatives we are building together, they also apply to our work ethics as researchers. Solidarity, reciprocity, association, in the team, very little hierarchy. In my team, for example, when somebody wants to explain to me, Moulaert, your theory is crap because this and that, I would ask the person to not use the word crap to begin with. I would be upset because they challenge my theory, but then I would land and listen. And maybe I would accept what they said. I mean, I have a terrible character, but despite that, I'm very capable of listening. So, this also has to do, obviously, with the dimension of reflexivity in research practice. What am I doing as a researcher? Which theories am I using? Which role am I having in this whole process? Is it time to withdraw as an emeritus? Is it time to let my successors do what they have to do? What role should I play next? Maybe I should withdraw now and go and work in the field, work in the garden of the community project, and stop thinking for a while, cleaning my brain. Thank you very much.
Would you like to reply to some question or to stop now to have a break? and to start up a...
But we go meeting, they stay here and write down the questions.
Yes, of course, yes.
And then they are not
Okay. No, you can stay here this afternoon. Because I think that Frank is a little bit...
I can answer questions.
It depends on the breakfast. I had 4 breakfasts. 4 breakfasts. So you are energized for answer to one question to Pierluigi and the junior. 10 minutes, then we have the lunch.
Then we have the Zen salutation.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Okay, so...
No, just like that.
Thank you. Sorry, you made up your mind?
To see how difficult democracy is.
No, sorry I was late, but I enjoyed very much your presentation, apart from knowing your work. So I'm actually currently reading a history of modern China. So I'm very much against the cultural revolution approach. So not only I think you should stay and continue work, but I think your contribution should be more appreciated by the people currently working in the social innovation field. And let me say, I will add a little personal talk later, because I have a little proposal for you, if you accept to work a bit possibly with our colleagues at the University of Bologna. But on your presentation, just one point. I was very interested in the concept of social innovation action research. And let me give you just a very kind of banal, but I think possibly useful question or suggestion for you, and I would be interested in your opinion. As you know, in the next 3 years, each 2020 projects on SSH add migration, migrants, and one of the leading trajectories. So, very simply, social innovation research in migration, meaning in dealing, let's say, with the general issue of migration and the integration of migrants from outside Europe. What can social innovation action research be practically useful in this field? That's my request for suggestions.
Yes, I said something about that at a conference in Rome 2-3 years ago. I don't remember exactly. There's a project led by Marcello Balbo. I wasn't discussing there, but I have some ideas on that. Yeah.
I'm sure you are.
If you agree, I follow up on this question because it's quite related to. One of the points, it's very intriguing in your presentation. So one of the points is on this kind of double level between the analytical level and the normative one. Because I think, and also Giulio was here when a few months ago, Greg came here to give a lecture on public sociology and the role of social science. And I think here there are some kind of overlappings because you are right to the idea of ethics, solidarity, and I think there is this idea of public engagement of theory and methodology. But then how do you work in order to keep a distance, I mean like a distinction between the analytical, scientific knowledge and the normative approach? Because I think that also it is a challenge to say,
how do we define a normative approach?
I mean, like, society works like that, or should be like that, or have to be like that. I mean, this is better.
This is the method that I was talking
Yeah.
about at the time. I mean, the practical utopia, always in interaction with. And how far do you go in giving in to, what would I call it, institutional determinism? How far should you go in trying to influence the change of institutions? Because as scientists, you can be very aware that institutions are really perverse. New public management is perverse when it is applied to its system. You can have norms of efficiency, but you should not put them in new public management model. You have to put them in a model which provides the dynamics of society. As hopefully I will explain this afternoon, the innovation systems model is not a reflection of how society works. It's a reflection of how technocratic
innovators would like certain innovation systems to work. See? And that's very normal. So, in a way, our work, the network's work, social innovation, is much less normative than any of the innovation systems. Because we always have that dialogue between. This is a good question.
I didn't want to follow this question.
Wait, just a question, because this was a reflection, but the question is following also what Giulio was saying. Because my question is a practical question. It's like, it's a practical, pragmatic question. I mean, like,
Pragmatic and practical.
more practical, more practical. I mean, like, for example, following on this idea of migration, I work also with the London School of Economics on this global migration initiative, where the idea is to influence policies and projects at the European level on migration, on integration, on how to deal with the refugee crisis. And I try to do it also on a local level. I mean, like, to try to talk with operators or like policymakers and to explain we don't have to reflect on this and to approach it as just a problem, but even as an opportunity, or not just in terms of emergency or crisis, but in terms of integration, citizenship, and whatever. But then I would like to ask you, how to foster the dialogue with these policymakers, with these practitioners? I mean, what kind of language, what kind of key language?
Which ones? Are you talking about the bureaucrats?
In these cases, for example, there are the practitioners who work, for example, in reception centers, who have this idea that, like, oh, yes, great, but you have an emergency, and you have to find a place where to put these people, blah, blah. And then we have the problem with the policy makers. I mean, the deputy mayor who say, yes, but now, my problem is not this kind of integration, aspiration, recognition, it's, to deal with 100 people who are arriving, and I have to put them in a reception center, and then I have to find a job. This is my problem. And then you try to open the mind. I mean, this is the case of migration, but it could be the same with tourism. I mean, that you explain that it's not the must incoming, but it's like becoming, is to try to change the relationship of local development and not only economic growth. But what I see working with them, I mean, with operators and with public policies, public policy making, is the idea that is the main problem is to find the same grammar, the same language, the same key elements to establish a dialogue.
I agree with that. That's at the heart of action research also. But there are some social and psychological conditions that need to be fulfilled. People should be open to the language of the others. Political leaders should be there with an open mind, not with a secret agenda, as one often says. So that's very difficult. I didn't say anything about social psychology and interpersonal relations, but they are very important as well. If you want to build a consensus on what to do on the ground in the field, you need to have this openness and this gradual building of trust, which is very difficult in situations where there is very little time, like emergencies, receiving refugees, and so on. Still, I understand. I'm not a specialist in this, but I understand from my Greek students that there's a big difference between the situations in the refugee camps in Greece. Some are working well, others are in absolute chaos. I'm the last one to explain why that is. But certainly I understand that this sense of cooperation between the different local actors is absolutely necessary. Because, of course, the tremendous lack of financial resources increase in general for these issues in the future. Even if the EU brings in some money, it's still not sufficient. We should know that.
Anyway, my view of the world is that we're all there to try to make it better. And sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't. We can understand as scientists very well what are the conditions to make it work. We have to accept as human beings that these conditions to make it work can sometimes be met through collective effort, through political transformation and so on, or cannot. I mean, what will happen under Trump, we don't know. Impeachments, hopefully.
Okay. I don't know if
The afternoon.
yes, it's better to break now for the lunch, okay? Then in the afternoon we can start back again with some questions, Okay, thank you.